Hey,
Okay. Hey. Hey.
hey.
Okay, I can't even do it.
All
Calling
right.
Chris Anderson. Where are you?
This morning I'm in Tokyo.
Okay,
Can you
and
tell?
yeah, and the TV is on.
Yeah, because we were like talking before the show and doing a bit of a tech check sort of thing, and we realized that the Wi-Fi t seems to be working better with the TV on in my room.
Oh,
So, so you get some Japanese news while we are.
can we see what's going on there? Hang on.
Uh,
Okay,
well, there's a
and
commercial
then
about
some
there's a
sushi.
yeah, the commercial about making sushi. Um,
This is either you're really in Tokyo or this is really good deception that you're
isn't
producing
it?
here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go.
Well, I'm in the same
And you
old
are in.
place,
You are.
Chicago. Yeah.
But you're on the other side of the screen, which is different. So
Oh,
that's
we can,
you've traveled that far. You've traveled
yeah.
that far.
So,
No, that's fine. I like.
well, it's because when we started and then we quit and we both restarted our computers and you futzed with things there,
Oh,
you
okay.
came on first. So because you were first, you're on the
Oh,
left. So
gotcha.
that's what that is. But we can always change it, and you can change it too. Just drag
Yeah,
yourself
Rick, I
over to
just
the
have to
other
stay.
side of the screen.
I just have to stay awake. Really,
It's 5 a.m. in
it
Tokyo.
is. It
What
is
day is
indeed.
it?
Yes. You're asking way too many questions. Wait,
It
let me check.
it
It is. It's Monday.
It's Monday in Tokyo. Okay,
Yeah.
welcome everybody to History Happy Hour on Monday in Tokyo. Thanks to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours for just rocketing Chris over the Pacific and putting it where he had to get up at 4 o'clock this morning. And he deserves so much praise for not only being awake, but being dressed.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
that's for the sake of our guests and our
yeah. Um, Anyway, thanks to Stephen Ambrose Tours. Check out their rich offering of military history tours at stephenambrosetours.com. And whether you're watching live, watching on replay, listening on the HHH podcast,
podcast.
we are glad you're here. And today we'll be talking about kind of whatever comes to your
Yes.
mind or our mind. So let us know you're here. Let us know what you're drinking. So Chris, you're in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Let me just say, as people are joining us, what is your itinerary there? Where have you been? Where are you going?
All right. So, I don't know, a week ago, I flew 20 hours to Okinawa. So it was Okinawa, then Kagoshima. So Okinawa, 3 days through the battlefield. Kagoshima to see the home of the kamikaze, they took off from. Now I'm here in Tokyo doing some site inspection work for 4 days, and then I fly to Honolulu for Pearl Harbor, and then Honolulu to Guam,
And now at that
Guam,
point, you'll have guests with you.
yeah, yeah, and then Guam to Palau and Peleliu, and then Peleliu back to Guam, Guam to Saipan, Saipan to Tinian, back to Saipan, back to Guam, back to Okinawa, back to Kagoshima, Tokyo, and then Boston.
And somebody's made all these airline reservations for you.
Well, see, that's one of the interesting things is three people have made
Be
all these.
very
So
careful about what you say
yeah.
here.
No. So I was asking somebody about one of my airline reservations, and they said, "Well, I sent you the email." So I went back through, and for this trip, from all the different people, I counted 79 different emails about airline reservations. So it's been interesting. I just show up
So
at the airport, wait till somebody takes me somewhere.
and hoping that they do.
Yes.
And if they don't, you gently pick up the phone and in a kind and avuncular voice say,
Yeah.
"Oh, my friends, I believe you've made an error."
Yes.
Something like
Yes.
that? Okay.
Something like that. It's like
Okay.
you're quoting me.
So we want to thank, before we get on with the show, we do want to thank our patrons, especially our top shelf patrons. Um,
Yep.
you can become a patron. There's room. Believe me, we can find room on here. Um, Go to patreon.com/history happy hour, and that helps us keep um, keep the taps running on History Happy Hour. And
Absolutely.
so, yeah. And so, I mean, honestly, I went to Skokie yesterday, and
And how was Skokie?
that was the extent of my travels this week. It was
But
very nice. I went,
oh, good.
saw a lovely concert with Nathans and Ronstadt, who, look them up. They're good. Yeah.
All
So,
right. You said so.
But let's go, Chris.
Were you up front? Were you up front with a lighter, like kind of shouting? And
I was like,
oh, okay, you're doing the old guy dance.
I
Oh.
neither of those things actually. So give me a cue, and I'll get us into this monstrosity of whatever we're doing. The extra rings are to help wake you up there
Oh, okay, okay.
in
Well, you
Japan.
have, and the bar, such as it is open.
It is now. So we did have a guest scheduled today, and those of you who
Yes, we did.
follow us faithfully on Facebook might have noticed that that was posted for a few days and then it went away. And an issue came up beyond our guest's control. And so we had to reschedule that show, and we are going to bring him back. No
Yeah, so
bad
fair
stuff.
enough. We'll have real guests eventually again.
Right. But we have
But
5 encore episodes coming up, and we just couldn't stand the idea that of having
right.
6 encore episodes. That just seemed like there wouldn't be any audience left by the end of it.
Probably not.
So we wanted to squeeze in one more live show. I've just been brought a glass of water, so
Oh, yummy.
very nice. And so it's a history happy talk show. So if you have a question, something you think we should address, throw it up there. We did ask people in advance for some questions, and so we'll start with some of those. And Chris, I'm always a little bit, I don't know about you, I'm always a little nervous on these shows because
somebody will have anything to say.
Well, also somehow that my real depth of ignorance will show through, and or some other aspect of my real personality that I'd really rather.
Well, just Rick, why don't just talk about the Ghost Army, and you can just you
Oh,
just wind me up on
fantastic!
your
Let me
end.
get started. So
I can go take a shower.
Well, let's start with a question from Craig Condon, and he said wants to know any new historical books you're looking forward to reading or historical topics you wish would be written about or covered in more detail.
Well, I mean, those are.
So yeah, I'll put it to you.
Well, I have 2 separate kind of questions, but I'm incredibly excited that Richard Overy's new book about the bombing of Japan should be out like within the next month or so. And everything he writes is truly outstanding and generally a game changer. And we've had him on the show, so hopefully he'll come back to talk about that book. And then we got the press information for Lynn Olson has a new book coming out about
Yes.
Ravensbrück, which I'm very excited about because she's one of my favorite authors, favorite guests, and I'll be in Ravensbrück, I don't know, in a month or so. So those will be
We're
2.
talking to her on June 8th, I think. So that'll be shortly before. I think that's the week before we're together on the cruise.
Okay.
We're going on a cruise together.
It's not like that though.
Well, other people are going as well, like our wives.
So to clarify.
But so not exactly new, but we're going to be talking about John McManus's, excuse me, I don't know who Dan McManus is. John McManus's series of books about the fight in the Pacific. This is the first one, Fire and Fortitude, and I'm really looking forward to that because we haven't spent a lot of time on the Pacific, and we did last week, and I really liked that show. And so we're going to be talking to John, and I was just sitting here before we got started. I was reading the first few pages of that book. You'll never guess they're about Pearl Harbor, and but it's about the U.S. Army in the Pacific. And so it's a 3 volumes, and we're going to. I don't remember when the first show was scheduled, and then we'll bring him back 6 months after that, and 6 months after that, or some schedule like that. And then I just got this in the mail today. I feel like we've booked this, The Nazi Mind. By Lawrence Rees. And if we haven't,
we're getting him in because Lawrence Rees he's one of the greatest authors about fascism and the Third Reich.
He's authored The Holocaust, A New History, Hitler and Stalin, and Auschwitz, A New History.
Yes, he is truly outstanding. So I hope that I better have a copy of that when I get home because
Well, he
we
lives in
definitely want.
London. Of course, you like him. He's one of those Brit guys. But that book comes out May 6th, so I suspect that someday in May we'll be talking to him. But I think we've booked it. So
Thank you. Well, good.
pretty
And also
excited about that.
that saves me having to buy the books.
And look, as long as we're on the subject of books, Les Martins wants to know what to read in preparation for the Poland and Germany tour. Now, not
Yes.
everybody in our show audience is going on that tour, sadly. Um,
Well, they should.
I wasn't invited to come, so I'm not
What
going.
type of work you make yourself?
Pardon? Oh, I lost you a little bit there, but they were wondering what books you'd recommend they read, and they've got the recommendations from the Stephen Ambrose website, like A Traveler's History of Poland, but thought you might have some favorites. I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
you do, and we're checking. And now Chris is frozen, so it wasn't the TV. Ah, let's wait a minute and see if he unfreezes.
Am I? No.
Chris, you've been you're frozen still. Can we hear you? Can you talk?
Okay. And I'm talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
All right. Well, I'm going to type this too, but the best single volume is called The Eagle Unbowed by Haluk Kachansky, who we had on the show.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, hers is
So
Antony
sorry.
Beaver, Berlin, about the Battle of Berlin.
Okay.
And how am I doing?
Heard the
And
first
a book
book and
called
heard there was an Antony Beaver book.
yep, she's called Berlin.
Okay.
Uh, uh, and then another book called Anonymous: A Woman in Berlin. Those would be my
Oh wow.
recommendations.
Wow. I just I just attended an author reading for a friend of mine who's written his name is Todd Lending, who's written a Holocaust novel, which I have started but haven't got very far into, called The Umbrella Maker's Son.
Okay.
But he had been inspired by several books, and one of them was by a man who owned a pharmacy in Krakow.
Yes, yeah, we go there on the trip.
Yeah, and I can't remember the name of the. I'm so sorry. Didn't research this. It
Well,
just popped into my head. But it sounded like, this guy somehow managed to stay in Krakow and avoid being
yes,
sent off with all the people who went off to the different camps. And so it's his story of that whole time. And that, my friend Todd based one of his characters on the pharmacist, but it made me want to read the, original book.
yeah,
So,
it's called it's the Eagle Pharmacy, and it's
yes,
right,
yes.
yeah, and it's right where the square was where they transported all the Jews from. And so, yeah, it's an incredibly moving story, and I'm seeing if I can remember the title um, of the book. But yes,
Well,
look
you
up
know
Eagle
what? Let's
Pharmacy.
put this to our guests who are not speaking and can access Google, and someone tell us what the title of that book is,
Mm.
and so people can know about that. But I thought that I think it's interesting that there are so many first person accounts. We sometimes view this history as being very distant and it happened a long time ago and far away and we can't get close to it, but there are so many people who went through not every part of it, but they went through a part of it and then they survived and then they wrote some visceral first person account. And there's a lot of that there, so worth looking at.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take one more question from the ones we started with, and then we can maybe start looking at some of the questions people have put up here.
Okay.
And this is from Jim House, and clearly Jim wants to just cause an argument because Jim says, "Who should have won the war for independence?"
Are you saying that Jim already knows how we're going to answer this
Well,
question,
first of all,
or
is he talking about the revolution?
the War of the Rebellion? Yes. Right. Moving on.
Who should have won?
Um,
How does one
see
answer that?
that well, that has the potential of veering into current events, which we won't do. So let's just say, I will say that I think that the world would be a very different place if there had been a different ending.
Well, let me change the question.
Okay.
Sorry, Jim. To something that I've been thinking about as I've been researching the revolution in preparation for our tour of Lexington. Don't worry, I'm not going too deep. I won't challenge you too much. but
My head will explode.
but I was just like, what if Britain had just said, I don't know, in the maybe in the summer of 75 or spring of 76, if Britain had just said, okay, okay, you want to go? It's okay, fine, go. You've got a Congress. You want to be under our king? You can be under our king. That'd be fine. You don't want to be? That's fine. Because at some point, why wouldn't Britain have realized, hey, we're never going to get enough money in taxes to pay for the huge expedition of going out there and trying to conquer it? We're going to end up with an unhappy populace who are 3,000 miles away. They're going to end up going their own way eventually anyway.
Mhm.
What if Britain had just said, okay, we
Well,
give, never mind?
but the fact how you formulate that question talks very clearly about how you view the event. So when I formulate the question, I say, what would have happened if the rest of the colonies told the people in Boston to stop listening to these crazy people that are causing all these difficulties? And what if all these people in the colony said, we're citizens of the freest empire on earth. We pay nothing in tax. And oh, by the way, the government's 3,000 miles away. We're just going to sit here fat, dumb, and happy. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting is that the protests against the Stamp Act really were
Yes.
colony wide. They were not just in Boston. There were violent protests up and down the colonies. It wasn't
Right.
Sam Adams. It wasn't what's his name, McIntosh and his mob in Boston. It was stuff going on all over. I mean, clearly that hit a nerve that bothered a lot of people. Um,
You remember when we had those very bright young people from National History Day and that
I
one
was just thinking about that, right? Caleb
yeah,
Sinwell and the other folks. Yeah.
wrote about the committees of correspondence. So I think that probably had quite a bit to do with it. But
Well,
I think that
literacy is a good thing, and writing is
literacy
a
is,
good way to
yeah.
communicate.
So no, I think eventually there would have been some kind of evolution, and what became at least the Eastern United States would have been a Commonwealth nation.
I do think it's a shame. Yeah, one of the things that so some of you may be coming on our Lexington trip, and so I'm going to let you in on a secret, which is that Chris and I don't actually disagree about that much. We'll try to
But this would be one of them.
well, we'll try to preserve the secret. But I do think it's a shame that this had to be a war, because
Absolutely.
that is a shame. That's a shame.
I think no matter how you view the outcome, it was a civil war, right? And civil wars are never good.
So, okay. So I've taken. So you had another question that somebody had asked that about POWs, and
Yeah.
and so I should bring that up because I know you were. I didn't make a note of it here, but I know you're prepared to answer that. So,
Well, I thought it was a Doug had asked about First World War prisoners. He doesn't read very much about it. Um, and again, numbers are kind of a little all over the place, but they estimate between 7 and 9 million soldiers become POWs during the First World War.
wow.
Uh, yeah, about 10% of them are die while in captivity, so a much much lower number than the Second World War. Um, and I think there are certainly instances of brutality towards prisoners, and I'm thinking of the British that were captured at Kut in the Middle East. I know conditions got very bad for Allied prisoners towards the end of the war, but that was more of a function of the Germans being unable to feed themselves, let alone the prisoners. Um, so I guess a better experience, but certainly not a pleasant one. I mean, he'd also asked about specific books, and it's interesting that there really isn't one. They all tend to be sort of specific to different countries. But if Doug is interested, there's a book by Richard Speed called Prisoners, Diplomats, and the Great War. It's just kind of a higher
Prisoners,
level,
Diplomats, and the Great War.
yeah, which is kind of a higher level look at the prisoner system. And then there's one by Oliver Wilkinson, British POWs of the First World War, um, which speaks just to British prisoners, but at least might touch on the prisoner experience or have a bibliography.
So, okay. So, all right. So here's some questions that people have posted up. So, I guess by taking over the control of the question, I do put you on the spot, but you can always say pass to you, Rick, if you want to, and I'll go first. Was Omar Bradley a good general? My impression is that he was overrated and promoted beyond what was earned by his friend Ike.
Well, Wally, no, he wasn't. Yes, he was. No, obviously, you have to be careful when you're not in that position. But my reading of events is that I'm not that impressed with Omar Bradley, and I do think he was promoted beyond his level of ability. But
Yeah, yeah.
having said that, how many people who become generals during the Second World War had ever commanded anything that large, complex, involved? So, but I don't think he was the best we had.
So obviously, I know you're a big Eisenhower fan, and I know you're a
Yeah.
big not a fan of Patton. So who else were good generals? I mean, from the U.S. point of view.
Well, I mean, I think one of the great sort of forgotten about generals, and we had our guests talk about him, was Simpson. Ninth Army, I
Simpson,
think, was
yeah.
outstanding. I think Devers was good. I think Patch was good. So those would be, at least in Europe, the guys that I think are up there. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think I was not a Bradley fan. Like him more than I like Courtney Hodges, but I think Courtney Hodges was a disaster. And what's funny is that Bradley was such a big Courtney Hodges
For Rodgers
fan
fan, right?
and really trying to promote him after the war. I'm
Well,
a,
Hodges is the one that I think Jim actually asked that I called one of Ike's generals an idiot. He was trying to
yes,
remember.
that's
It
what
was
put him in my
Hodges.
head. Yeah, it was
It was
Hodges.
Hodges.
Who's an idiot? It was Hodges. Um, and I think that Simpson is an excellent general. I am I find it's interesting looking at the guy who is the commander of the 29th.
Gerhardt.
Gerhardt, not, I mean, had a ton of casualties. You can't call him a great general, but a guy who was just aggressive and pushing from the beginning of the war to the end of the war. So I mean, when you get down to the divisional level, you're talking something on the level of, if you include the Pacific, something on the level of 80 or 100 generals. But some of them get relieved, some of them fall apart. There's a guy who kind of goes from the beginning to the end,
Uh,
pushes hard, and maybe loved by some of his men, hated by some of his men, but kind of an interesting person.
yes.
Okay, so Lynn Hargrove. It's funny how these names always keep coming up. It's like Wally and Lynn are the only people listening. But no, I'm just teasing. I don't mean that. Says new tours are added all the time. How do you decide which tour you want to research for a new addition to Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours? So I'll start with that one.
You should
Yeah,
start.
yeah, yeah. Go. Because, I mean, for example, Chris and I in 2019, along with my wife Marilyn, we scouted out our first Revolutionary War tour. And that was from Boston to Quebec, and we did it in the snow when nothing was open. It was crazy.
Except for one. What's that? One Comfort Inn that like all else must flow from. Remember?
Oh no, you're talking about the place in the Best Western in Fort Ticonderoga,
And it
perhaps?
was wing night. It was wing
Wing
night.
wing night. Yes, it's always wing night there.
Always wing night in Ticonderoga.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And right, so that's become the centerpiece of that tour because it's the only hotel within about 40 miles of Fort Ticonderoga, so we need to stay there. But so then we wanted to plan. Then we got people came to it. People liked it. People wanted more American Revolution. So then I scouted a second tour, which actually was the end of the revolution. So it started in Charleston, South Carolina, and went to Yorktown, Virginia, the 1780-1781 campaign. And then of course then I've been pushing with the folks at Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours to add a third tour, which I'm now going to go out and scout in May, which I call the Campaigns of George Washington, because Let's Drive Around New Jersey doesn't sound like a great title for the trip. But literally it's almost every battle in this tour, and there are just a ton of battlefields, is a battlefield that either George Washington, you start at West Point where Benedict Arnold tried to give everything away. And George Washington is there the day that happens. And then you're down in the Battle of New York that Washington is involved in. And then the other battles in New Jersey, Washington is involved in almost all of them. And then down, of course, to Mount Vernon and Philadelphia. I'm sorry, Valley Forge and Philadelphia. And so, I mean, I think that it comes up, after we did the first tour, the other ones kind of came up naturally. Chris, I imagine the same thing is true of you. You've scouted new tours recently. The same thing is true of
Yeah.
tours in Europe and Asia.
Well, I think obviously some tours come out of an anniversary or or a sequence. So obviously it's the 80th anniversary for a lot of events. So last year we did the 80th anniversary of Operation Dragoon, and this year we're doing E-Day 80th anniversary, doing 80th anniversary of the end of the war here in the Pacific. So those sort of happen naturally, but then also a lot of tours happen because it's a story that I'm interested in or something that inspires me. So what I did, if there's something that I find intriguing while I'm on tour, I'll just start asking guests, and if some of them actually go, "Oh, that sounds interesting," then I'll try to pursue it. Or if they roll their eyes, which is what happens most of the time, I retire it to the back of my brain.
Right. So, and one of the interesting trips that came up, and it's probably a different story than most, is the Battle of Lexington 250th anniversary trip,
Right.
which a person from the Lexington Historical Society emailed me and said, "Hey, Rick, would you like to bring people to Lexington for the 250th anniversary?" And that's one of those questions that the only good answer is yes,
Uh,
yes. And so, but that has led to discussions of other anniversary tours. We've talked about doing an anniversary 250th anniversary of the Battle of Saratoga. We haven't really done much for it. I know there's been some interest in doing 250th anniversary tours in next year in 2026, but it just seems to me it's going to be so crazy busy that I'm not sure that that's the best plan. Although that may be the year that we start, in the fall of that year that we start our campaigns of George Washington tour. So
yeah. Well, yeah. So I also kind of along those lines. There's a tour that's I'm going to be doing a site inspection for later this year. That's a result of a sequence. So Ambrose does lots of stuff in southern Italy, so I'm going to site inspection the trip for the war in northern Italy because that just makes sense sequentially. And then also at the end of the year,
Ghost
I'm going to
Army,
do, yeah, well,
Ghost
no,
Army's involved. Yeah.
what, in northern Italy?
Yes. Yes. Right at the end of the
Oh,
war.
I'll forget about it.
You have to
Never,
cover this.
never
You
mind,
have to
never
cover
mind.
this.
No,
You
no,
have to cover this. You have to. You can't do, oh my God, the Gothic line. You can't do Northern Italy without covering the 3133rd, which carries out two deceptions. And you love this. They're teaming up, and I may try to do some research on this when I'm out there in Great Britain in June. They're teaming up with a British unit that has inflatable tanks. So it's British guys with inflatable tanks, American guys with sonic deception, and they're carrying out these deceptions on the Gothic line I think it's April 45. Yeah, you must cover this. Now, okay, Chris is frozen, and I think he's pushed a button and is making a personal statement
I
now.
am. Well, actually, I've never been happy about like cutting out, but that was an opportunity. So as I was saying, I've got the well, I had until Rick started talking. I had the War in Northern Italy as a sequence trip, but then as an inspirational trip, at the end of the year, I'm going to do a site inspection for it's tentatively called a military history of Ireland. So we'll do military history sites in Ireland. So that will be November, and that's happens just because it happens to be something I'm interested in.
You can cover the story of my ancestors, the British soldier who married a Catholic girl, and it all went so badly they had to move to
So,
America.
or the third version is all of my tours are based on something that Rick is interested in, and then they would, and that's how the tours happen. So, Rick, if you could just put a list of,
I admit it. Yeah, I'm manipulating you. I've got the puppet
uh,
strings. Yeah.
yeah.
So you were talking about Italy. So Nancy Nallens has a question,
Mm.
and she says, "Why do we Americans write studies so relatively little on the war in Sicily and Italy?"
Well,
And
I would. Oh, go ahead.
no, no, no. Go ahead.
No. Well, I would just say that it's a very controversial decision to go into that part of the world. There's never a successful resolution as to whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision. Um, I don't think that we perform. There are some setbacks performance-wise in Italy that you don't see in up north. And I think it's sort of like the war in the Pacific. The quickest way to victory is a straight line, and you march from France into Germany, and that's where the action happens. So yeah, I just think it's not as sexy, basically. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I want to say that what's really ignored, I think, is the war in North Africa. And I know people who consider themselves, there's a person I'm thinking of, considers themselves well read in history, well read in current events, who literally was unaware that we had fought in North Africa,
Oh,
unaware that the American army had gone into action there. And of course, it was the American army, the British army, the German army, the Italian army. Um, a- and so that is kind of ignored. And then in Italy, the thing that really strikes me in response to that question is, the I have to be careful here. The Pulitzer Prize winning historian Rick Atkinson wrote an excellent book, which won the Pulitzer Prize, about the fighting in North Africa, then wrote a book about the fighting in Italy. And that book ends on June 6th when the US Army is in Rome and
yeah.
skips 9 months of Italy and skips I think I mean, I think the is Monte Cassino happen after that? I mean, I know the 442nd is involved after that,
Uh,
all sorts of stuff.
well,
And it does seem to be kind of, I think because D-Day has
yeah,
such a hold on people,
yeah.
it drives out everything else.
Well, and I would also add to that that you, I think most people in Britain and the Commonwealth and in Poland are very much aware of the Italian campaign.
Oh, the Polish are very involved in that, right?
But I think that's part of the other reason that most Americans, it doesn't get talked about as much, is because it's a British theater of war, and Alexander is the commander there.
Right.
So it's not an overall, technically, it's not an overall American commander. So again, that's going to be
It's
something that
not
makes a lot
Mark
of people.
Clark. I thought
Well,
Mark Clark
he likes to think it was, but no.
was the commander.
Yes,
It's my Mark
he
Clark
likes to think
imitation.
that was very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Kind of like your Washington imitation and your no, sorry. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so anyway, that's another reason.
All right. I'm literally scrolling down here. Doug McCord says Maryland should be today's substitute guest. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Um, so okay, this is from Jim Latin, and Jim Latin says, "History Happy Hour understandably skews towards military history. Do you ever encounter any books on economic history that you would recommend?
Yes. Well, though, I mean, I absolutely would urge you to read, I think it's Wages of Destruction by Adam Tooze, which is about how Germany basically funds the war. How do they pay for the Third Reich? Which
What's it
is a
called again?
facet. I think it's called Wages of Destruction, but it's the author is Adam Tooze. I don't want
Okay.
to put too much going on my Wi-Fi here, but
No,
my
Two's
edition,
Tewes,
Tooze.
Tooze.
Yes, Z-E.
Z is not a letter um, in the Gulf of
Moving
America
on.
language.
Moving on. But
um,
that, and then kind of along another one is Hitler's Beneficiaries, which is how the Nazi Party basically keeps the German people engaged by their economic policies. So those
well,
would be
when
two,
we
a couple
were
of.
so I'm gonna fumble here because I'm gonna fail to remember names. But when we were in I guess it's Munich on the D-Day to the Rhine tour last year, and I'll be there again this year. We were talking about that there was a banker whose name escapes me, who was one of
Yeah.
Hitler's big bankers, had a bank down there, helped finance in the war, and then managed through hook and by crook to basically avoid going to prison once the
Mhm.
Americans won, and then emerged. They basically they wanted to imprison him, but he knew too much. They needed him to bring him back. Do you remember the name of this person? Do you know? Is this?
No, but it caused me to remember that book they had on the show, Nazi Billionaires.
Oh,
He may
right,
have been
right,
discussed in there um,
right.
about all the corporations. So,
But this guy lived on. His bank is still there. His grandchildren run it, and he just basically seamlessly switched sides, and
mhm.
just about making money.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, everybody, you're watching History Happy Hour, and we're not interviewing anybody today. That would explain why it's just Chris and I. Chris is in Tokyo, if you joined us
Mhm.
late, and he is thinking about why he's up at 5:35 or 5:37 in the morning in Tokyo. And I'm looking at other questions from, let's see if we can bring in some other people. Um, I so s- I'm okay. I'm looking at the questions. Chris, do you have anything? Do you see any questions
Well,
here
no,
that
that's
you?
that. I was going to say I saw Jim's comment about who was the idiot general, but then other than that, none of them. The questions are showing up here in Tokyo, so you're gonna have to.
Okay, so well, I've skipped some that are hard to answer. So I'm skipping hard to answer questions. Uh, but Angela
Okay.
Gordon says, do you recall a precise author guest who wrote about her mom? Yes, N.C.R. Davis was her name.
Yes.
I do recall that. I do not recall the title of her book, but N.C.R. Davis, and she doesn't use her first name for whatever reason, but her mother was a nurse in World War II. She wrote a very interesting book about it. She was a fascinating guest, and I've emailed back and forth a little bit with her since that show. And so that's somebody worth remembering. Okay, so I'm moving on down here, and Angela asked the same question again, so I'm only going to answer it once. Um, okay, I'm not sure if this is a question. Let's see. Uh, D-Day invasion. Prior to D-Day, did almost everyone know it was coming except for the date and location due to the tremendous buildup of Allied personnel and resources in England? Yes, I'm going to
Yes.
say yes.
Yes. I would agree. Everybody expected it to be the spring of '44.
Right. Nobody knew when and nobody knew where, right? Because it was okay. Go ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, interestingly, all of the German generals thought Pas-de-Calais. Hitler, for a while, thought Normandy, but then was convinced it was Pas-de-Calais. Right, he started to believe his generals. So after the invasion, the part of the reason why there's that, I guess, 2 week delay with the German generals not releasing all the reserves that they could have is they expect the secondary. They think that Normandy is a diversionary landing. So there had been some back and forth. They had an inkling of Normandy because when I studied Frederick Morgan, who some of you know I'm a little bit interested in, the man who plans the D-Day operation, he was tasked with finding the spot to launch the landings. And even though it's a really big, long coast, when you start to factor in all the different elements, there are really very few places where there are options for the Allies to land. So that's a long answer to a short, or could have been shorter, but so that's a little bit more complex. I would also just add, though, that the the Germans, or I should say Hitler, um, expected the invasion to come, and he was excited about it. He was looking forward to it. He thought it was an opportunity to um, defeat the Allies. So they weren't scared of the invasion.
So okay, so this is something that that freaks me out, and has for some time, which is okay. The Americans and the British, and let's not forget the Canadians
Canadians, thank you.
and the Polish
Yep, and
in,
11 countries combined.
invade, and even the Danes have naval vessels.
The
They
Greeks,
invade Europe in northern France. Okay, and by August they've won in Normandy.
mhm.
August, mid August, after the Battle of Falaise Gap, August 20, August 18th, August 18th, I think is the date that ends of 1944. Why does anybody in Germany keep fighting? Why? I mean, Hitler, I know, and fascist government, but you would think at that point that everybody could read the tea leaves and say anybody that can bring over 60 divisions, that can put millions of men in France, that can take all this territory, they are not going to be denied. And by the way, that's a pretty small scale compared to what's coming from the other direction, from Russia. So why the hell, uh, you know, I understand that it's Hitler, but even, down to the last day of the war, you've got,
Right.
SS people who are shooting traitors, and then surrendering 3 hours later. I mean, what the heck's going on there?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a
It's a
big
big
question,
question.
but I mean, getting back to one of our earlier questions, I would suggest that you take a look at Hitler's beneficiaries, because he talks about how committed the German middle class, or the bulk of German people, become, and how wedded they are to the system. So I think there's part of that. Part of that, there's a question of just you can't believe that it's over. And this is another arguable point, but I think that the Germans knew what they had done, and they knew that they weren't going to be let off the hook. And so you're going to ride this train wreck down. I mean, um, they made the devil's bargain. They knew that the Allies were going to not accept anything but unconditional surrender. They'd heard about the Morgenthau plan to break up Germany. So there's a fear that you're going to destroy Germany. And if you're in the East, you know, there's the fear of what the Red Army is going to do when it gets there. So you know,
And then
not
there's
a,
the fear of being executed by your own side if you're not
yeah, yeah.
moving on strong enough. I mean, it's stunning to me when I take people through these battlefields, through in September, you have the battles in Holland and Operation Market Garden. You go into the Battle of the Bulge, and the fierceness of the fighting here, and it's like this war is over. This war is over.
Well,
You're
I
just
right, and I think that what is very interesting is if you look at German casualties for the war, their bloodiest months are the last months of the war. Right, the casualties don't go down as the fight. Right, so that tells you that there are more and more people that are refusing to submit, and also there are a lot of Russians and Allied soldiers that get a lot more violent because they're like, well, why aren't you surrendering? Why are we doing all this? So they get angry, and right,
right. There's a diary or perhaps letters from a Ghost Army soldier. Got it in named Harold de Halchiers. And he's sort of saying, why are the Germans still? This is in November of 44. Why are the
Right.
Germans still resisting? Why can't they see it? And I do think that that's probably an attitude that was prevalent among American troops. Is like, come on, guys, you've lost, and so if you're going to keep fighting, well, f you, we're
All
gonna
right. Well,
dump on you with everything we've got.
as I get ready for the VE Day tour, like I just a lot of time in Germany, and one of the things you find is that a lot of the decisions that the Allies are making, like the strategic bombing, like we go to Dresden, you know, there was obviously some strategic value to bombing that target, but I think a large measure of why those targets were created, that target list was created, was we just are like going to punish them until they stop, right? You know, so.
Ah,
But
um,
the same thing is happening in Japan. I mean, I'm in Tokyo and I'm going to go to the old Imperial Guard headquarters today, and after we drop the second bomb, there are Japanese officers that refuse to submit and are trying to keep the emperor from surrendering. It's insanity.
well,
Yeah.
what other sites have you seen in Japan that engaged or surprised you?
I got to tell you, we went to a place called Chiron, which is the airfield so the kamikaze, or the suicide forces, um, are split between Army and Navy. So one day we went to the Army part of it, and the other day we went to the Navy part of it. But in Chiron, there's a memorial to the, I don't even know what it is, 1400, 1500, something like that, Army pilots who killed themselves. And there is a Buddhist lantern statuary thing, for each of these kamikaze outside the temple. So when you go into this town, and there are almost 2,000 of these stone temples, regardless of the ideologies, it hits you, right? Because it's a physical manifestation of the loss. But that was very impressive, and it was impressive emotionally, and it was also interesting because I hadn't realized just how structured and organized it was. Right? So yeah, so that would be those two sites at Chiron. I think really surprised me.
Um, so we have some other questions here. Carolyn Goff says, do today's Germans understand that it was Hitler's reluctance to surrender, and I would say it's a little more than reluctance, that perpetuated the continuing bombing of Germany? It's very hard to generalize about people
Yeah.
in Germany because there's all sorts of people all across the spectrum, and there are some people who still feel that their ancestors are guilty of a giant sin that they want to expiate, and there are other people, I'm sure, who are just like, that's in the past, don't care,
Mm.
moving on.
Yeah, I think the if you're interested in kind of delving into that a bit, there's a book called The German War by Nicholas Stargard about how Germans are perceiving the war. I think that I think that they view the bombing as sort of a punishment. Um, and in fact, in
The
Stargard's
book.
book, yeah, he looks at letters, and they say in these letters at the time, the reason that they're bombing us is because of what we're doing to the Jews. So there's clearly some kind of an awareness of that. Um, but I do think that many Germans think that they were just being punished by the bombing, that there was no other point to it.
So this is an interesting question. I'm not sure I completely understand it, but that's, this is what happens. Now I get caught here. Jen Kemp Boyle says, while on pilgrimage near Assisi, where is Assisi? That's in Italy, right?
Mhm.
I chanced upon a
Yeah.
small cemetery in which there were graves of U.S. and Canadian soldiers who had died in mid-April 1945. When I got back, no one could or would give me an explanation as to what happened there. Your thoughts, please.
But I
I
obviously
don't know
I
anything
don't know
about it.
I don't know any details of what was happening specifically in Assisi in April of 1945. But I do know. in northern Italy, of course, there's an
where the
Italian
Ghost
fascist.
Army was operating, right?
I mean, you're just hitting it out of the park this time. You care to take over? Then
Just
you should be
seeing
able
if
to.
you're still awake.
You should be able to answer this question then.
All right, go ahead. Yeah.
So,
All right, I give up.
yeah, okay, go ahead. Okay.
I'm
But there are a
down.
lot of There are a lot of Italian fascists there in northern Italy, so they're continuing to fight. And of course, there's a civil war in Italy going on between fascists and communists. So there's a lot of guerrilla activity. Uh, so that may have had something to do with it. The interesting thing about your question too is that as if they are American casualties, they should have been sent to an American cemetery because American soldiers, as a rule, are not buried alongside Canadian soldiers and British soldiers. And of course, you'll always find exceptions, but if you saw Americans and Canadians buried together, that's unusual.
I am so I'm just looking for one more question to get us through towards the end. So Ross says, if Germany had surrendered, could it have just been a repeat of the World War One ending? And I think what he means is that if Germany had surrendered in, I don't know, let's say before Hitler's assassination attempt or around that time, when they still had all of their borders under their own control, would it have sort of been a repeat of World War One, where Germany surrendered, and the people in Germany all thought, "Well, we've been betrayed," but they were never invaded, they were never brought down. And I don't think it would have been the same because I think that had Germany been serious about surrendering in 1944, that the Allies would have been had pretty high levels of demands for Germany. I don't think they were going to allow Hitler to get away. I don't think they were going to allow Germany to simply surrender and not have any troops come in. I think that the Russians would not have put up with that, and I'm not sure that the Americans would have put up with that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think that obviously once the Germans make the decision to make the war a racial war, there's no other way out. So once you start the genocide, um, that's game over for Germany. Now, if you take that out of the equation, I still don't think it would have been the same because there would have been a lot of people that said, "Okay, twice in 20 years you've done this to us, and
Yeah, we're not going to put up with it.
we're
We're
not
not
gonna
going
put up
to.
with this."
We're
And
not
that's
going to.
yeah, yeah. I think the one of the things that is interesting is that because of the First World War and the Russian Revolution, you have the Communist Party, which prevents us from breaking up Germany after World War II. So this is a whole lot of what ifs. So bear with me, but um, if there hadn't been if the Cold War hadn't started, I think there would have been a lot more people that would have had serious discussions about breaking up Germany. But that's a whole lot.
Not simply into the four military zones,
Right.
but literally breaking it up and forcing it to be back into almost like the Prussian state, the
Yeah.
German states of 1800s,
I mean, remember, I mean, we don't think about it, but Germany is a very young nation,
right?
right? And so,
1840s,
no,
1850s.
1870,
Yeah, okay.
right? So 1870, they declare themselves a nation in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, and then they start two world wars. So I think
Well,
that
they're
there's
very
some
quick
people,
at developing.
you know what? I think if there hadn't been the whole Cold War scenario,
And you're frozen again, but it's a good time because we're almost done. Give you a second to see if you can unfreeze. Maybe something will come on the TV. Uh, guys, thank you so much for being with us today on this um, history happy talk. I did skip Kevin Kavanaugh's question of short discussion of the merits of the bow tie versus the standard tie because
oh no, 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 I want
there's no
that.
discussion.
There is, yeah, it's a tie. It's a tie. You wear a tie. And we were talking this morning, like, well, you're even dressed for the show. I'm like, I'm underdressed because bow
You're not
tie,
wearing a tie.
please.
So a tie is a tie,
Now you
whether
know.
it's bow or
No, no,
non-bow.
no, no. Little boys in knee breeches wear bow
Oh,
ties.
no, 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 no,
Yes,
no, no.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
I totally beg to disagree. And
Oh, the
I
throwdown has begun.
a bow tie is what the truly dressed man wears. And you living in the
Where?
UK where you're surrounded by bow tie wearers and
Nobody
you
wears bow
none
ties.
that they would think that would have worn off. Well, maybe you're not hanging out with the right people.
Maybe
Oh,
not.
I see. You're with a lower class level of people.
No, we're just understated elegance. Rick.
Okay.
You feel the need to, you know.
I'll be wearing should if you'll wear a tie every day on the Boston trip, I'll wear a bow tie every day on the
Well, you
Boston
know
trip.
I'm going to wear a tie every day on the Boston
All
trip.
right. So are you going to wear a different tie every day?
I do. I have a whole little tie sleeve that I bring with
Okay.
all my
I will.
ties. And
I don't know if I have enough bow ties to go a different tie every day, but I
we'll
will by the
see.
time we go to
That says
Boston.
quite a bit about your choices right
Yeah, I
there.
don't wear the ties that much. Mostly when I go out. Mostly I wear my camouflage bow tie or my poppy bow tie. So. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your being here. Next week, I am afraid to say this, but it is the first of our 5 weeks of encore episodes.
Mhm.
We've built up a whole lot of live episodes in a row. Don't
Yeah.
abandon us.
Yeah, well, we promise we're coming back, and there's some like really awesome books coming up. Books I'm really
Yes,
excited about.
and the first one is a terrific one. It was our interview with Michael Paradis, the author of The Light of Battle, Eisenhower, D-Day, and the Birth of the American Superpower. So, you get to see Chris be very all excited to talk about Eisenhower. It's kind of a fun
And
thing there.
flap my arms around in a
And
hotel
and when we're
hallway.
and when we're live again, I will
Yeah,
just say, which I think is April 20th. When we're live again, we will be live together in the same room.
it's shocking.
I don't know. Have
Provided
we
we
ever
don't
done
beat.
a
No, well,
whole
yeah,
show? We
we
did
did.
we did an intro to a show, but we didn't do a whole
No,
show like that.
well, we did that thing when we did the Normandy masterclass, and I said you were full of shit. That was like live together in the room,
Well, I
but that was a
don't
long time ago. I don't
right,
feel that way about you now.
but but that was an intro and an outro, and then we had taped bits
Oh, okay.
with
Okay.
Hugh
So
and
no, this will be
so
our
this will be the
first our
first time
first lesson.
and our guest will be there with us.
Yep.
So we're going to need Chris. I'm depending on you to come up with the technology that we need to handle this show.
Okay. Okay.
Not
So
sure
so
how
we'll
we're
have
gonna.
it.
Not sure what's coming there, but we'll figure it out. Guys, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Blue Sky, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon, and browse historyhappyhour.com.
And during this long absence, please do email us if you do have questions or things that come up. And until we are live again, and I'm wearing a tie and Rick is wearing some rag around his neck, be safe.